Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, where we talk all things fantasy football. As always, I'm your host, Jeremiah Martinez. I do the show solo like every Tuesday. And, of course, Anthony's not here on Tuesdays. But we have a lot to talk about today. You know, we're going to recap the Monday Night Football game from last night between the New York Giants and the Cincinnati Bengals, as well as some top performers from Week 10. I'm going to talk a little bit about Alshon Jeffery, if he's still stashable, is he droppable, what to do with him, since he has been served a 4-game suspension due to violating the NFL's substance abuse policy. And we're also going to be talking about our top waiver wire pickups of the week, like how I end the show every Tuesday. But first, let's get started with some recap of the Monday Night Football game. The New York Giants defeated the Cincinnati Bengals 21-20, and there was some notable fantasy performances last night. Most notably, we had Odell Beckham Jr. He had 10 receptions on, I think, 11 targets, 97 yards and a touchdown. I was kind of hoping he would have got another touchdown in this game. I really need another touchdown to win my game this week, but it's whatever. There's always next week. And other players that had a touchdown reception in this game include Sterling Shepard, who looks like he's coming back slowly, becoming a role player in this offense. Kind of like how he was earlier this year when he got off to a really hot start. So it looks like he's starting to regain a role there. You got Jarrell Adams, who caught the first touchdown pass of the game from Eli Manning. Eli Manning put on a kind of a strong, kind of a bad performance at the same time. He did have 3 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, 240 yards. He was the leading passer of the game. And Rashad Jennings was the leading rusher for pretty much the whole game for both teams. He had 87 rushing yards on 15 carries. The Giants total had 122 rushing yards. So Paul Perkins was involved in this offense. They are a committee, so to speak, but it looks like Rashad Jennings is still the lead running back in this offense. And for the Cincinnati Bengals, they had a chance to win this game, but they kind of fell kind of flat late in the game. They just didn't know how to get the ball down the field. They couldn't run the ball throughout the whole night. So I just don't know what it is about this team. But notable fantasy performances include Tyler Eifert, who had a very long touchdown reception on 71 yards. That was on the weird. No, it wasn't weird that he caught the pass. The formation was weird. I'm not sure if you guys saw this, but it was like 1 center and 2 guards, and I guess the tackles were lined up in the outside, and Tyler Eifert was in a 2-point stance. And they don't just sling it in the air. And Tyler Eifert had a 71-yard touchdown reception. That was pretty much his only reception in the game until probably in the second half. End of the second quarter. But he did finish the day 96 receiving yards, and that's pretty good from a tight end. That's kind of what you expected from Eifert. He didn't get a touchdown in this game, but he was a very good contributor. And, A.J. Green kind of had a down game. He had 68 yards and a touchdown. You kind of expect, A.J. Green to have a better day, so to speak. But, you do expect better things from A.J. Green. But, the Giants kind of kept him in check the entire day. So, moving forward, what to do with... I want to talk about what to do with Odell Beckham Jr. here. Odell Beckham Jr. is still a must start, still a mustache. Just top 5 start every week. Starting Shepard, though, I think he's someone that can be shaping out as a receiver 3 heading to the week 11. But Rashad Jennings still looks like he's the back to own there in New York. Jeremy Hill for the Cincinnati Bengals, didn't really do a whole lot. He did have a touchdown, 46 yards. He still looks touchdown dependent. Tyler Eifert still like he is back on the tight end 1 map. AJ Green, even though he had a down game, is still a must start week in and week out. Andy Dalton looks like he kind of has fallen out a little bit. He didn't have a really good performance. He only had 204 yards and a touchdown. So, what to do with Andy Dalton, I don't know if he's a week-to-week starter, but for sure, I would definitely go with Tyler Eifert, AJ Green as a for sure starter, and of course, Odell Beckham is going to be a week-to-week starter. But that was the Monday Night Football game. I'm going to get into some top performers from this week. Man, what a game. What a game in Pittsburgh we had this weekend. Dallas Cowboys defeated the Pittsburgh Steelers 35-30. What a game. It's probably game of the year. I think we're going to remember this game for a long time. And Ezekiel Elliott, he looks like he's playing like a fantasy MVP. Yet or no, he might actually become the actual MVP of the NFL this year. Man, he probably had his best game as a pro. And I know he may not have his best stats, but this is the game I think we're going to remember Ezekiel Elliott for. Because remember, he had that walk-off touchdown run at the end of the game. And I think this is the game where we're probably going to remember this Dallas Cowboys team. Because remember, this game started off for the Cowboys. They were down earlier in the game. They were down 12-3. And then Dak Prescott threw a 82-yard touchdown pass to Ezekiel Elliott. Ezekiel did all the work in that one. That got the game started for the Cowboys there. So Ezekiel Elliott went over 200 yards and 3 total touchdowns, 38 total points. So probably the best game we've seen from Ezekiel Elliott all year. Aaron Rodgers, I know Tennessee pretty much dominated the entire game, but Aaron Rodgers still put up really good numbers in garbage time. He had over 370 yards, 2 touchdowns. He did throw 2 picks, but Aaron Rodgers did get a touchdown in the ground. But the Packers look like they have been falling off as the team, but they're still putting up really good fantasy numbers. Remember, Devontae Adams did get 156 yards in this game. He looks like he's a legit player in this league. He has a legitimate role. And they got James Starks back in the backfield. Tom Montgomery looks like his role might be diminished there, so James Starks might be the back to own there in Green Bay. Marcus Mariota, man, Marcus Mariota is now, he's being a week-to-week starter now. And, he had 4 touchdowns and 295 yards. Man, he is a legit fantasy quarterback now. I said that for the past few weeks. He's someone that I think he's like a must start at this point. The way that this Tennessee Titans team has been playing, you kind of have to start him now. You kind of have to. You see I didn't think he was going to do this well against this Packers team, and I know the defense was kind of hurt. They haven't been playing well, but man, Marcus Mariota did impress me in this game. I think he's someone you have to pretty much consider starting week to week now. And, of course, Ben Roethlisberger did put up really good numbers in that game against the Cowboys, which feature a lot of really good fantasy performances. But we see he had 148 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and he also had 1 yard rushing. There you go, Big Ben. 1 yard rushing. But Ben Roethlisberger did look like he had a fantasy day. He was on his way, to having a big day. But, he's just someone you have to start. He's a must start every week to week. And I got another player I want to talk about here before we take our first break. But Ryan Matthews possibly had his best game with the Philadelphia Eagles, let known this year. He had 109 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. And he also had 30 receiving yards. So he looked like a legit running back in the NFL. He had arguably his best game against the Atlanta Falcons in a game that the Eagles won. And I'm not sure if Ryan Matthews can keep up this consistency, but if he does, I think he's someone that looks like he's going to be hot in the, for the down the stretch, especially heading towards the playoffs. But those were my top fantasy performers, or some of them, from this week. But we're going to take our first break here. And I'm going to talk about Alshon Jeffery and what to do with the Chicago Bears offense. And I will talk about that right now when we get back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And we're going to talk about some news out of Chicago here in the fantasy podcast here. And I want to talk about Alshon Jeffery. He has been suspended without pay for the team's next 4 games for violating the NFL policy on performance-enhancing substances. Well, in a statement released on Monday, Jeffrey blamed his PED violation on taking a supplement that can taint an ingredient banned by the NFL's drug policy. In the statement, Jeffrey said, quote, "As a professional athlete, I have been careful about what I put in my body. I took a recommended supplement to combat inflammation. Unfortunately, the supplement contained an ingredient that was on the NFL's banned substance list. I take full responsibility, and I'm deeply upset with myself for not doing the proper research on this supplement. I want to apologize to my family, the Bears organization, my teammates, and Bears fans. I will work hard to earn back the respect and trust of the Bears Nation, and looking forward to being back on the field." End quote. Well, it looks like Jeffrey, his fantasy value, it has obviously been diminished. So with Jeffrey being hit with the 4-game suspension, it kind of pretty much ends his fantasy season a little bit. He can return in week 15, but he's been so lackluster in this year. I think he's possibly someone you might have to drop. Unless you're already in the playoffs, unless you have a playoff spot clinch, I would hold on to Jeffrey. I would stash him at that point. Maybe he can become a contributing player in the playoffs. But if you are not if you're still fighting for a playoff spot, I think it might be safe to drop Jeffrey to get someone that can help you right now. It is too much of a risk to keep a player that might not help you this week if you're still looking for help in the to get to the playoffs. But man, with just 2 games, Jeffrey only has 10 plus fantasy points. He only has 70 yards per game. So I don't really think it makes much sense to hang on to him at this point. Maybe if you really do need that roster spot, or if you don't need it, it's going to be a hard time to leaving a dead roster spot for someone who's is not guaranteed to be a difference maker right now, maybe not in the playoffs. But I think if you have a roster spot and if you're in the playoffs, I think that's the ideal situation for him right now. But, man, let's take a look at Alshon Jeffery's numbers here. He only has 3 games where he's gone over 80 yards, and that is not good. So, week 1, he did start off the season pretty hot. He had 105 yards on 6 targets. Okay, we kind of expect a game like that from Jeffery. Against the Philadelphia Eagles in week 2, 96 yards on 7 targets. Week 3 against the Cowboys, 70 yards on 7 targets. Week 4 against the Detroit Lions, 46 on 5 targets. 77 on 6 targets against the Colts. 93 yards on 13 targets against the Jacksonville Jaguars. 33 yards on 11 targets against the Green Bay Packers. 63 yards on 9 targets against the Vikings. And 47 yards on 9 targets against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Jeffery just hasn't done anything. I just don't know what it is. Maybe it's Jay Cutler playing bad. Maybe the team is bad. And I just don't know what it is or what's going on with him. But, this does leave, the absence of Jeffery leaves Cameron Meredith as pretty much the go-to guy in the Chicago Bears offense now. So Meredith is really going to be the guy now to own. I think Zach Miller is going to get a lot of opportunities as well. Meredith didn't, he hasn't really shown much since his 2 games when he had over 100 yards receiving in week 5 and 6. And he hasn't really been of a factor since. Maybe that's because Brian Hoyer was looking at his direction a lot. But Cameron Meredith has emerged as something of a role player in the Bears offense. Well, Meredith has been he's remained on the field. He has been playing 147 snaps over the last 3 games. That's 106 more than any receiver on the team besides Jeffery. So Meredith is involved in this offense. He just hasn't been gaining the looks and the touches. So, his targets haven't been great. His receiving hasn't been great. But now since, with Jeffery out of the picture, Jake Cutler has no excuse to not look towards Meredith's way now. Jay Cutler has been pretty much a disaster this year. He's been a disaster. But we've seen Cutler, be kind of relevant in fantasy. We've seen him have relevant fantasy performances, and we've seen Cutler, keep receivers fantasy relevant. We have seen that. That's why Jeffery was pretty invested high this year. But I think Meredith is pretty much his best target now. Even by default, you have to like Meredith's chance of contributing down the stretch. He's the second most targeted receiver in this Bears offense. That's 13.1 targets percent. 13.1% targets that's second to Alshon Jeffery's 22.9. So that is a lot. Actually, no, I take that back. Alshon Jeffery's the top receiver in targets at 22.9. Zach Miller has 19.4, and Meredith has 13.1. So Meredith and Zach Miller are guys that you have to own now. Meredith hasn't really shown a lot, like I said, but there's no excuse. You have to take a shot on a guy that I think that can contribute down the stretch. I don't think Alshon Jeffery is going to do much for you right now if you really need help right now trying to get to the playoffs. But if you have a playoff spot locked in and you have a rare roster spot to play with, I think Alshon Jeffery is pretty much a safe stash. But unless you're fighting for a playoff spot, you need the roster spot for someone to help you right now, I would just go ahead and drop him. I can't. He's too much of a risk right now to have on your team if you're fighting for a playoff spot. But that's my thoughts on what to do with Alshon Jeffery in fantasy, what to do with the other offensive players on the Chicago Bears offense. That's going to be we're going to go to our second break now. But when I come back, we're going to get into our top waiver wire pickups of the week, and we'll be right back here to Go Instant Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to Extreme Cage Fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And we got the waiver wire pickups of the week coming up. But I have something else for you guys that is a must pick up right now. I'm talking about a razor from Harry's. Whenever I like to get ready for a big event or, like to clean up good, I do it with a razor from Harry's. But compared to other razors I've used, I've had the smooth shave I've had with the Harry's razors. So, big razor companies, unlike Harry's, have made small change. And they always come out with the newest version. And they always raise their high prices, unlike those big name companies. Harry's doesn't believe in upcharging, which is why they made their razors even better and are keeping prices exactly the same. So Harry's is so confident in the quality of their blades. They're going to send their popular free trial set, which comes with a razor, 5-blade cartridges, and shaving gel. And you can get their free trial set. Get your free trial set right now when you subscribe. Just pay $3 per shipping. Plus, I have a special offer for you guys. If you enter code GSMC at checkout to get a shave balm for free with your order. So go to harrys.com right now and enter code GSMC at checkout to claim your free trial set and post shave balm. That's harrys.com. That's HARRYS.com. And now it's time for the top waiver wire pickups of the week. And like we always end the show, we're always here to help you guys out to, try to get some players to keep you going this fantasy season. Hopefully you guys will get these players to help you make a playoff run. Or maybe you just want these players to stop people from making the playoffs. You don't want your friend to make it, so you're going to get him. You're going to get a player that your friend wants. And even though you're not going to be in the playoffs, you want to keep your friends out of the playoffs. And that's always fun, right? That's why it makes fantasy so fun. But anyways, we're going to get to some top waiver wire pickups here. I got two running backs here that really need our two must-adds this week. If CJ Prosise is not on any fantasy team in your league, I think he is the number one pickup this week. Prosise spent most of the rookie season with Seattle training staff, so he hasn't had a lot of playing time, but entering week 10, before the game against the Patriots on Sunday, he only has 17 touches as a pro. So we didn't really know what to accept for Prosise with being heavily involved into the game plan for the Seattle Seahawks. They wanted to get Prosise involved in this offense, and man, was he involved more than ever. He had over 150 yards, total yards from scrimmage. Prosise carried the ball 17 times for 66 yards. And he also has 7 targets, 7 receptions, gaining another 487 yards. So Prosise did not score a touchdown in this game, but he was heavily involved in the Seahawks offense. He looks like he might be the clear number one back now. It's tough to say that because Thomas Ross is likely going to return week 11 against Philadelphia. Christine Michael hasn't been the same guy that we saw beginning of the year, so I think Prosise has earned a role despite if Thomas Ross coming back. I'm not sure if Christine Michael is still relevant in this team, still relevant as a fantasy player, but I would still hold on to him. I would see what Thomas Ross does in week 11 before you can think about driving Christine Michael, but it looks like I wouldn't be surprised if the Seahawks went to a 3-man approach with Prosise, Michael, and Ross, but it looks like the way that I think it's going to shape out, I think Thomas Ross is going to be the early down back, and Prosise might be the change of pace receiving back. Procise is great in the passing game. He was phenomenal. He put up great numbers. He's definitely a PPR option. I would say that by far. But he's someone that needs to be added in all leagues. Even if he doesn't start a Week 11 against Philly, if Thomas Rawls does start that game, I still think Procise is still someone that is startable in PPR leagues and maybe standard leagues. But another running back I want to talk to, James Starks on the Green Bay Packers. Starks finally returned from his knee injury in Week 10 against the Tennessee Titans. He didn't really do much when he had the ball in his hands, but he did dominate the snaps and touches in Green Bay's backfield. So the game flow for the Green Bay Packers didn't really go a whole lot. They were getting blown out in this game, so that's probably why we didn't see a lot of touches from James Starks. But it looks like Tom Montgomery, he's not really involved in the running game anymore. James Starks looks like he is the back to own now in Green Bay. I know Tom Montgomery just barely got running back eligibility, but I think Tom Montgomery is kind of done being a relevant fantasy contributor, which is a shame because he could have helped you as a receiver despite getting running back eligibility. But James Starks looks like he is back to being the guy, being the main running back in the Green Bay Packers backfield. He does have a lot of upside, but he is 30 years old. He does average less than 3 yards per carry. He should have a lot of volume because Eddie Lacy's on the IR. So Starks is pretty much the lead back in Green Bay because of that. And he does get some pretty favorable matchups against Washington and Philadelphia. So I think he can possibly be a flex option. He could emerge as a RB2, but this Packers offense has been struggling, so we'll see from there. But I do think James Starks is the number 2 must-add this week. And I want to talk about Tyreek Hill from the Kansas City Chiefs. He looks like he's someone that needs to be owned because it looks like Jerry Maclin is going to be out for more games. Maclin is dealing with a groin injury. Hill had a lot more opportunities in Week 10. I thought Hill, it wasn't really a surprise to me, but Hill drew 13 targets on Sunday. He did have 10 receptions for 89 yards. So the targets are there. He had a 1 carry for 12 yards as well. So he has rare speed. He leaves the Chiefs in receiving touchdowns. So and Hill faces the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a team that has a lot of the most fantasy points to wide receivers. So Hill should be a top 25 fantasy option this week. That's assuming if Maclin doesn't come back. So I think he's someone that needs to be owned right now. And another player I briefly mentioned in the last segment, Cameron Meredith. So Alshon Jeffery is facing a 4-game suspension. So it was pretty much shocking to people in fantasy and probably in the football as well. But Meredith gets a huge bump because of the loss of Alshon Jeffery. His value has gone up. We already seen what Meredith has done. He's capable of having a big game. He has excellent size, really good athleticism. He has a pair of 100-yard games. So Meredith and Zach Miller are going to be the targets that Jay Clare is going to look to, and it looks like they're going to be throwing to both of those guys a lot. So I think Cameron Meredith is someone that needs to be added, like I previously mentioned earlier in the show. And Eli Rogers is someone that needs to be added as well. The slot receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, he did score once against the Cowboys this past Sunday, and he had 42 yards. So he had a pretty decent fantasy game. That's coming off of a 6-catch, 103-yard performance at Baltimore. So, injuries have been an issue for Rodgers. He's now healthy now. And Big Ben is healthy now too, looks like. Big Ben looks like he's feeding him. Steelers have a really, really great matchup against Cleveland coming up. So I think Rodgers is going to top 10 fantasy points for a third straight week. And, the Browns have allowed a league worst 25 passing yards so far this season. So he's someone that needs to be stashed. And for quarterback help, this time of year is kind of hard to get. If you have someone that needs to be, if you need a streamer quarterback, I'm going to have to go with Colin Kaepernick. I think he's someone that needs to be picked up if you need a quarterback, need a streamer quarterback. He might be a little bit more than that. He has averaged 57 yards per game in his 4 starts this season. He did toss 2 touchdowns and had one on the ground against the Arizona Cardinals. He has finished as a top 8 fantasy quarterback in back-to-back weeks again, and he had a tough matchup against the Cardinals too. So he did pretty decent against a really great defense. That was after he torched the Saints defense. So the fact that Kaepernick could run, he's a dual threat, I think it gives him an ability to be relevant in fantasy. He looks more comfortable in Chip Kelly's offense, and I think as the year goes on, I think he's going to improve I think he's going to gain relevance back as maybe a week-to-week starter. I know that might be saying a lot, but he looks more comfortable in Chip Kelly's offense, and that we might see it. We might see maybe a good fantasy performance against New England, a team that really got torched by Russell Wilson, another dual threat quarterback. Even though Russell Wilson is a little bit more of a playmaker than Kaepernick is, I think Kaepernick might have an opportunity to have a good fantasy day. Well, that's my top waiver wire pickups of Week 11 here. And, of course, that ends the show. So, as always, you can catch the show every week on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, YouTube, and SoundCloud. You can also listen to the show on the website, gsmcpodcast.com. You can also follow the show on a lot of our social media accounts, Twitter, Instagram. The handle for both of those accounts is at @GSMC_football. You can also like the show on Facebook at the Going to Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. As always, I'm Jeremiah. And you guys have a great day. Get those guys on your team. And I'll be back on Friday with Anthony. And have a good rest of your week.